All right. Randolph Bourne, Bourne. Truly a fascinating figure. Um, Died very young at age 32 in 1918, just after World War I came to an end, uh, and was quite handicapped and disfigured. And he wrote about that. He's an important figure in disability studies. Um, and an important early 20th century young intellectual. All right, shows a lot about the atmosphere, the intellectual atmosphere of America at his moment, and also a passionate opponent of the war and a passionate pacifist. All right, I mean, I guess I'll go into this um, this series doesn't necessarily want to focus on the history of American philosophy per se or academia, but I think we can show some stuff along those lines with regard to Bourne. He went to Columbia a little late because of all his physical disabilities, and he was a student. I get the impression like a beloved student of John Dewey. Now we've seen William James, and his anti-imperialism. And we might suspect that had William James lived, he would have opposed American involvement in World War I, but we cannot know. Bourne certainly thought that James would have opposed American involvement in World War I. But Dewey supported it. Now, while he was, just after he finished studying with Dewey, I guess, Bourne wrote a beautiful tribute to the wonder of John Dewey, the wisdom of John Dewey, the Americanness of John Dewey, the importance of pragmatism. Just a kind of fan letter published in some journal or other. He was a contributor to the New Republic. I'm not sure if the Dewey thing was in there. I should look. But anyway, so then Dewey, unlike his great friend Jane Addams, for example, endorsed American involvement in World War One. I think it's fair to say that Bourne was angry about this, and not only because he felt personally sort of like he disagreed with his beloved teacher, but because he started to think that this showed something deeply wrong in Dewey's philosophy, actually, as well. And he kind of used American liberalism of the sort that endorsed the war, a la Herbert Croly, was that The Promise of American Life, or John Dewey, as a foil to set out his own positions and to articulate his own pacifism in a period which, as I've said, it was so difficult and isolating to be a pacifist. Now, I mean, he accuses Dewey of really falling down on the job philosophically, okay? And he starts to maybe notice things about Dewey's writing and stuff that he hadn't noticed before. For example, its extreme vagueness. So Dewey has a series of essays in the New Republic where young Bourne is also a contributor, where Dewey is endorsing the war and Bourne eventually gets let go because he opposes it. And, so Dewey is a public advocate of American involvement. One thing that Bourne notices about Dewey's advocacy is that, and I think you could notice this about a lot of Dewey in a lot of ways once you started, is its vagueness. The Dewey's advocacy of war is beset by vagueness. And it starts to occur to Bourne that this is intentional, really. Like, he could have been a hell of a lot clearer, but what he did was he just kind of like launched a bunch of balloons, like, big concepts, words, none of which amounted to a specific factual justification for war right now. So I'm just going to give you a little sample of Dewey in the New Republic and Dewey's vagueness about the reasons why he's endorsing the war. So one might, I think. This is, what's the piece called? It's a disturbing title even. The Future of Pacifism. The future of pacifism for Dewey is war. That's not exactly what he says, but I don't know. He's not talking about pacifism, actually. But he keeps saying, like Wilson, I'm a pacifist. Everyone's a pacifist. We all want peace, don't we? That's why we endorse this war to end all wars or whatever. Like, now, I mean, you can see how Bourne might just go, what the fuck, dude? Man, I thought you were better than that, man, when I was in your classroom 3 years ago. So one might, I think, John Dewey, go over, one by one, the phrases which are now urged to the front as defining the objects of war as the terms of peace, and show that the interests of pacifism are bound up with securing the organs by which economic energies shall be articulated. Like, the hope for peace is actually, you got to focus on the economic situation, okay? But I mean, no, we have securing the organs by which the economic energies shall be articulated. I wonder what organs he has in mind, that shall articulate economic energies. I did my dissertation on Dewey. Ended up thinking a lot of the stuff Bourne thinks about him. I think, like, come on, man, like, just say what the fuck you mean and say it as clearly as possible. Like, I think you're trying to do that and just failing immensely, Anyway, Dewey the writer could be stronger. We have an inherited political system which sits like a straitjacket on them since they came into being after the political system took on shape, the forces that mold economics. These forces cannot be suppressed. They are the controlling forces of the modern world, economic forces. Dewey's contacting Marx here. The question of peace or war is whether these forces, economic forces, are to continue to work furtively, blindly, and by those tricks of manipulation which have constituted the game of international diplomacy, or whether they are to be frankly recognized and the political system accommodated to them. That's the question? I don't know, man. The war does not guarantee the latter result. That forces will be frankly recognized and the political system accommodated to them. It gives an immense opportunity for it. An opportunity which justifies the risk. Like, all this death is justified by the possibility that the economic forces that are driving history will be frankly recognized and the political system accommodated to them. As a result, too many influential personages are pure romanticists. He means Jane Addams. He means his student, Randolph Bourne. They are expressing ideals which no longer have anything to do with the facts. They're unrealistic. And I'm a pragmatist, so I deal with realities, man. But these people are opposing the war. The war's going to go happen anyway, man. Like, be real, dude. Be realist. And Bourne responds to this heavily. The stereotyped political romanticism, of figures like Addams. See, if I was Addams and I read this, I'd be tempted to, despite my pacifism, to slap Dewey, okay? But that was not the kind of person Addams was. And she'd just say, kissy, kissy, we all mean well. I don't know. Maybe they had a private wrangle. I hope so. This stereotyped political romanticism gives the pacifists their chance for revenge. Their idealism has but to undergo a course in the severe realism of those economic forces which are actually shaping the associations and organizations of men, and the future is with them. So in other words, we will achieve peace through war and through like economic intermingling of the entire globe or whatever, okay? Will we know? But meanwhile, we're killing, okay? Massive industrial strength killing. Well, there's a chance that it will do what? Help us figure out the economic forces? I have no idea, dude. I just say like Dewey is just such a mainstream person that he's just not going to oppose the war in that situation and take a little minority position. He really is not. Okay, he's America's official philosopher already. Right? So he could try to nudge stuff lefty. You know, he calls himself a democratic socialist, even Dewey. But he's not going to oppose, you know, like radically oppose any probably government policy or whatever. He's going to talk it through, and plus that's his temperament. All right. Whereas Bourne thought of himself as radical, and I think that this is what radicalized him. Seeing people like Dewey just be, as Randolph Bourne thought of it, totally, utterly wrong. Just compromising yourself. Right? And that this showed that pragmatism just is not really anything. Like, okay, like means to ends or something like this. Okay, like, I don't know. Pragmatism could be pro-war, could be anti-war. What is pragmatism? I don't know, man. But one thing he says is that whatever pragmatism is, Deweyan pragmatism, is not working. It doesn't work in this war-like moment, okay? Because it won't let you oppose the war. And so it's going to encourage the war to continue. So it's going to cause death and destruction of the whole continent of Europe, okay? All right. So there's that. And then he says something like, God damn, where is William James when you need him? Now, that's the kind of thing that I think really would piss off your teacher, John Dewey. Where's William James when we need him? I have no idea how Dewey and James thought about this. Okay. Now, my sort of Twitter friend, Robert Talisse, the Jones Chair of Philosophy at Vanderbilt, has done some research on this, and he tells me that Dewey took revenge on Randolph Bourne for having opposed him and had him fired from the New Republic and maybe some other journalism gigs. And Randolph Bourne, handicapped Randolph Bourne, starved, basically, okay? Randolph Bourne's wife, said Talisse to me, I should have tried to research this independently, blamed Dewey for Bourne's death because he... All right. Boy, I think that's really, really, really wrong on Dewey's behalf. I shouldn't laugh, man. It shows a streak of cruelty that maybe is in there in the pro-war material too. I know lots of Dewey acolytes, I gotta say, and I've never quite grasped. I can see lots of positive things in Dewey. I can see lots of drawbacks to John Dewey, though, and you might as well just admit them, okay? All right. Okay, I'm gonna take a couple of pieces maybe from Randolph Bourne's famous article that did appear in the New Republic, I think, called The War and the Intellectuals. And, you know, this is about figures like Croly and Dewey, liberals, okay, who endorsed the war, including Wilson. The most famous sentence in this essay, The War and the Intellectuals, is, war is the health of the state. So anti-war might make you kind of anti-statist. And I believe that Bourne would have rolled in that direction as he went on. I mean, everything breathes that, I think, here. Anti-statism. War is the health of the state. So what is a state then? It's, it's what Hegel says it is, maybe. nothing is what Hegel says the state is. So, but anyway, whatever. But Hegel, that's almost a quote from Hegel. War is the health of the state. So a real quick response to that would be, yeah, fuck it then. Okay. So I'll read you a passage. He's quite a fine writer, although a young man when he writes this. There must be some irreconcilables left who will not even accept the war with walrus tears. I'm a little puzzled by that. I even looked it up. Walrus tears? Crocodile tears. Maybe. There must be some to call unceasingly for peace. There must be some, somewhere, somebody to call unceasingly for peace. It should be John Dewey. It should be Herbert Croly. But if they're not going to do it, then we're going to have to do it, all right? Younger people. And some to insist that the terms of settlement shall not be not only liberal, but democratic. There must be some intellectuals who are not willing to use the old discredited counters again and to support a peace which would leave all the old inflammable materials of armament lying around the world. There must still be opposition to any contemplated liberal world order founded on military coalitions. You know, there must be an idealist somewhere, and not just in a Quaker meeting somewhere. The kind of people that used to fill up this country, okay, as we've seen. The irreconcilables need not be disloyal. The irreconcilable need not be disloyal. He need not even be an impossibilist, just like pie in the sky, eliminate all violence or something. His apathy, or mediatist. His apathy toward war should take the form of a heightened energy and enthusiasm for the education, the art, the interpretation that make for life in the midst of the world of death. And that is exactly what he wanted John Dewey to do and say. And in detail, he showed how Dewey failed it here. The enthusiasm for education, art, interpretation, that make for life in the midst of a world of death. Education and art are things that could be used to create a peaceful world, but now they're being used to create a world of death. The intellectual who retains his animus against war will push out more boldly than ever to make his case solid against it, even in a situation where he's so embattled and everyone, his mentors and everyone else is against him. The old ideals crumble. New ideals must be forged. The old his mind will continue to roam widely and ceaselessly. The thing he will fear most is premature crystallization. Dewey might have said this too. If the American intellectual class rivets itself to a liberal philosophy that perpetuates the old errors, there will then be a need for Democrats like himself, and unlike John Dewey, whose task will be to divide, confuse, disturb, and keep the intellectuals constantly in motion to prevent any such ice from ever forming. That's what an intellectual should do in wartime, dude. All right? First of all, explore the art of war. Educate about war. Write about war, okay? And don't lose all your convictions and compromise them all into the mass hysteria. Or your class has all gone in that direction. Right? Well, hold on to your convictions, okay? All right. I got a bunch of things here. I don't know what I'll go right here. Here's an interesting observation. He's writing this as the war goes on. And one thing he's asking is the relation of what war does to people's opinions and convictions and values, and what people's opinions and convictions and values, how those fuel or lead to the end of a war effort. And these are some disturbing conclusions, but interesting factual claims and so on. We are learning that war doesn't need enthusiasm, doesn't need conviction, doesn't need hope to sustain it. The American people might be much more indifferent to the war, even than they are. And his claim is that the American people are pretty indifferent to whether you do this or not. Have other things to worry about than, huge abstractions like, quote unquote, making the world safe for democracy. And yet the results would not be materially different. A majority of them might even be feebly or at least unconcertedly hostile to the war, and yet it would go gaily on. As long as one has to earn one's living or buy tax-ridden goods, one is making one's contribution to war in 1,000 indirect ways. The war, since it does not need it, cannot fairly demand also the sacrifice of one's spiritual integrity. So there's a lot going on there. One thing he's saying is like, look, John Dewey, Herbert Croly, whomever you are, my friends, you're going to be supporting the war whether you want to be or not. All right. Every time you pay taxes, every time you interact, like in this world, when you're an American, you are in concrete ways supporting the war. Well, you don't need to also support it spiritually at the cost of your, I don't know, not your immortal soul, but your integrity, your philosophy, your decency, ethical decency, your friendship with Jane Addams, your friendship with your students, etc. You needn't do that. You're involved anyway. Why don't you just say what you really, well, not what you really believe, but what a person like you ought to believe. A person like you I saw in the classroom. A person committed to creative intelligence and to peace. Well, you're doing enough for the war effort. You don't have to spiritually become this war. But so why are you, man? And this is also moving toward this anti-statist thing, and also it sounds like Thoreau, Lucretia Mott, and stuff like this. And Bourne does this a lot. Like, you are obliged not to participate, okay? And as much as you can. I mean, in some ways you can't avoid participating. The whole nation is mobilized, and every transaction gives a little bit of tax to that thing, etc., But it's important that in any way you can, you express resistance. Doing various clumsy things here, as I do. All right. And he's pointing out that really, in a way, we've become slaves to our government. Like, the government kind of whipped us up into this frenzy. First Wilson tried to tamp it all down, then he tried to jack it all up, and Teddy Roosevelt too, especially Teddy. Right? Like war hysteria or whatever. Like, but actually people are pretty indifferent, and actually everyone should be a little hostile, right? You might lose your son in that thing, and are you sure you know why? Okay. But actually the whole momentum is just states, and this is so true in the World War I context. It doesn't really matter what the population of Germany or France or England or the United States thinks. And what they think after a while is manipulated by all in this hysterical war propaganda, okay, which is bizarre and evil. It's just what their governments are going to do with the money that they tax off everybody, okay? And that really does seem to be what happened with World War I. Just it was like this momentum of militarization that really didn't need a lot of popular support, okay? And whether it had it or not, I mean, we'll never know in a way, okay? Now, he certainly thinks that by the end of the war, or by the time we entered the war, the hysteria had swept the population, okay? Even John Dewey, okay? But not Jane Addams. And, but I guess in lots of ways, Bourne, so in surprising ways, Bourne engages the tradition of American pacifism and is really disappointed with Dewey for not doing that, and appeals to James, but then appeals to the pure spiritual conviction that drove Garrison and Ballou and Mott as well. And it is just so sad to see where American intellectuals, where American thought has gone in this era of imperialism, militarism, and war. Right? How far we have fallen, even since the life of James. So I think this is a cool little episode. Cool, I don't know. An interesting episode in American intellectual history. And I wish Bourne had survived, and I wish Bourne and Dewey had really thrown down a debate instead of just Dewey trying to get poor Randolph Bourne fired and shit. Like, I don't know why. Who could look? Randolph Bourne had so much to deal with, and was so sweet and so smart, and had his heart so obviously in the right place that I can't imagine getting so hostile. I mean, it must be really disappointing when your student says you're wrong. I did this with Rory, another great pragmatist. And maybe that arouses feelings of hostility that you can't quite control. All right, but I think Dewey should have listened to Randolph Bourne rather than trying to silence him. Well, what are we going to do next? I think maybe we will finally get to... Is it going to be Dorothy Day? All right.